Thanks again, and welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And if you're wondering why Kent looks extra dapper and good looking this week, it's because we're in HD for the first time.
Yeah, that's what I've been waiting for all these years in these shows. I've been waiting to go to HD, and that can really show off.
Yeah.
By the way, being in HD is just one new twist. This new set is really something that Cox has put together through their own efforts, and we really do appreciate the upgrade of our set. Randy Carson and her crew have done a marvelous job, and for us here on The Verdict, we're very grateful for that, and I think the viewers can pick out the differences.
Absolutely. We got a familiar guest today.
We do. We're going to talk about little post-election musings. We've got Keith Gaddie, Professor Keith Gaddie, the head of the political science department at the University of Oklahoma. He's going to come on with us, as he has done a couple of times before, and talk to us about the Senate race, the governor's race, and any other races, the congressional races, anything else he wants to talk about.
Keith Gaddie, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I like the idea of improvisation and starting with not a preconceived idea. All of my work is about visual images taken from my memory. I'm Brenda Kingery. I am an artist, and I'm a proud Chickasaw. One time I said, "Oh God, please don't let me die with my paintings in the closet." And what I would want them to be is everywhere. I would want them to be loved, to be used, to be respected. You work your whole life doing this. You just keep going as long as you can. And I have such a good background with a 106-year-old grandmother that I've always thought in my mind I would just paint till I'm 106. My Chickasaw heritage has become a primary part of my life, and the reason is it's a place I call home.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
People have been talking about energy independence for a long time. It's always been popular, but today it's possible.
We have an enormous supply of oil and gas in the United States, much more than we thought just a few years ago.
New technology, massive new discoveries, largely made by Oklahoma companies. It literally changes everything.
And Oklahoma is leading the charge. Go watch this video to see why. Energy independence starts with us.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
As I indicated in the opening segment, we are really pleased today to bring back to the set of The Verdict Professor Keith Gaddie, the chairman of the Political Science Department at the University of Oklahoma. Keith did his undergraduate work at Florida State University, did his master's and PhD work at University of Georgia. He's been at OU now 18 years. He is well recognized for his teaching capabilities, his scholarly excellence. He has authored many articles, way too many to list, and in the area of political science. He is had prior teaching experience at Tulane University and at the University of Georgia, and this is his third visit with us at The Verdict. Keith, welcome back.
It's good to be back, gentlemen. Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Yeah. What was your first impressions of the primary elections in June?
Well, you know, in a way, sort of more is less, Mick. If you look, the people who led ended up leading. What surprised us was that they ended up leading as big as they did. You know, especially if we look at the U.S. Senate primary and also the Superintendent of Public Instruction primary on the GOP side. Expecting Langford to lead, expecting Joy Hostetler to lead, this was generally expected. But those outright majority wins were somewhat unexpected. Mm-hmm. I think that we saw a situation where it seemed like the people that were less negative were winning. I think we saw that politics in Oklahoma, especially in that GOP primary, there's a core 250,000 people that like to participate. They show up, and they don't really seem to like negative campaigns that much. I think they're looking for something a little more affirmative out of their politics. And you know, we've always talked about sort of the affirmative, nice nature of Oklahoma. I think it may be rippling into the GOP.
What about these third-party attacks? Because the negativity wasn't necessarily paid for by the candidates' campaigns, and from personal experience, I mean, third-party campaigns can emerge when the candidate has no knowledge of what the message is going to be or who's funding it.
Yeah, the third-party campaign, or some folks call them the dark money campaigns. These are the independent expenditure advertising campaigns, usually either television or sometimes mail, where you have money that goes into often a 501c4 account, a super PAC account. And because if you spend less than half the money that's been given to that account, you don't have to tell who your donors are. No one knows who's running the thing. And in the Senate race, superintendent's race, we even saw it in the congressional race, we saw these third-party accounts being activated, bringing negative ads in to go after candidates. And generally speaking, the folks who struck first on the third-party negative ads didn't succeed. And we saw it even down in the CD5 race, where we saw Representative Mike Turner. There was a couple of affiliated third-party PACs that appear to be tied to his campaign going after Senator Russell. It didn't work out so well for Representative Turner, but for Senator Russell, it propelled him into the runoff. In fact, propelled him into a very narrow lead. It probably helped him more than it hurt him.
Yeah, it's an interesting, because we typically think that negative advertising works, and in these cases, it didn't seem to.
Well, Mick, if you think about it, negative ads do work when they're on issues and when they draw a contrast. But I wonder, not just for Oklahoma, but for the public in general, when they look at these third-party campaigns, if part of it is that if you're going to go negative, you ought to be willing to stand behind it. That it's okay to criticize a man, to draw a contrast with him, but you need to stand behind those words rather than hiding off in the tall weeds and throwing your bombs. So we may have reached sort of the limit of the public's taste for a negative campaign. They want to be able to tie it to accountability.
I thought I perceived something, it may not be correct. It looked to me like as the longer the campaigns went on with the negative ads, the more negative and more harsh they got. The ads were ending up with words I don't remember seeing in ads before, like unlawful, a fraud, a liar, dishonest. I can remember negative ads criticizing candidates' positions, but not words like that.
Yeah, the rhetoric did fly. And we saw these words that are designed to activate the emotions, right? They're designed to get at a base and guttural thing, and I assume somebody had tested those words before they used them. They didn't seem to resonate. It's possible, when you get into a primary electorate, Mick, you know this from having run the GOP primary before successfully. It's a well-informed electorate, and you can't tell them things about a candidate they probably don't already know. So when you attempt to somehow characterizing your opponent as being a liberal in the GOP primary, that's just a patently ridiculous statement to make. Nobody's going to believe that. There are no liberals in the state GOP, certainly not standing on the ballot.
Well, but the common thread throughout almost every campaign was everybody was running against the President of the United States. I mean.
Yeah, it's amazing how many the man is on every ballot position in the state. It's remarkable. Well, Barack Obama's a divisive figure. He has never been popular in Oklahoma for a variety of reasons. He's the first national liberal president we've probably had since Jack Kennedy. Honestly, I mean, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton were to left of center, but they were not national liberals. And Oklahomans have not seen a national liberal president in their lifetime, at least not in their adult life. And they don't react well to it. But, the nice thing is that the thing about the name Obama in politics for a conservative is you can take his name and attach it to anything as an adjective and it just rolls off the tongue. And it gets in the sweet spot of the conservative's ear and you get a particular reaction. It just seems to work. But yeah, part of the reason this works, though, is in American politics and also in Oklahoma, from the very top of the ticket all the way down, if you're voting Republican for president, you're doing it for governor, Congress, state legislature. Up in Tulsa, they're doing it for mayor. It goes from the top to the bottom in party politics. If you're a Republican, you vote Republican. If you're a Democrat, you vote Democrat. And if you're a conservative, you vote against Obama. And that's why we see those campaigns in this state.
Well, and I was going to say this for later, but since you kind of bring up that distinction, let's go ahead and jump into it now. We don't have open primaries registered Republicans vote for Republicans, registered Democrats vote for Democrats. There are several versions of open primaries. California has one. Then we saw a United States senator kind of get beat by one on the East Coast by this open primary. Can you kind of explain the open primary system? Because I think if you grow up in Oklahoma and you're used to the way we vote, you might think this is some campaign from Mars. It's significantly different.
Party primaries have actually been around since after the Civil War. And they first really got popular actually down in the South where general elections didn't mean much. So what happened is a lot of parties started having local primaries to pick delegates to go to conventions. And then that grew into just simply direct primary election of candidates. But out here in Oklahoma, our primaries have always been what we call a closed party primary. You register in the name of that party, and you vote in that party's primary. So the parties have the ability to exclude anybody from the primary that's not a member of their party. So it's called declare at registration, is what we call it. Open primary states, which are much of the South in particular, it's what's called a declare at the poll primary. You show up at the polling place, and you simply say, I'm going to vote in the Republican primary, or I'm going to vote in the Democratic primary. And I know when I was doing politics in Georgia and living in Georgia, we had an open primary like that. And one of the things it creates a challenge in those states, because if we try and analyze voters to understand if they're Democrats or Republicans, we can't go to party registration data. We end up having to go back and looking at their party primary declaration and seeing how often they declare for one party or the other. So you get a situation like down in Mississippi where Thad Cochran was seeking renomination and did so successfully. Ultimately, he trailed in the initial primary. Barely wins renomination, runs for renomination. But in Mississippi, if you have not voted in a runoff, in a primary, you can vote in the subsequent runoff. If you voted in the primary, you can vote in the runoff if you voted in that party's initial primary. So what Cochran's people did, and actually the guy who did a lot of the work on the Cochran campaign was Ed Goaz, who was also Mary Fallon and James Langford's political consultant. What Ed did that was really brilliant, they went out and they started targeting low propensity vote Democrats who didn't show up in the Democratic Party primary. They started targeting African American voters in the Delta and got them to show up and vote in the Republican primary runoff. And that's the fun thing about the open primary is you don't have to wed yourself to a party, you can pick and choose. And I think in the long run, what open primaries can do is they can force candidates to, when I use the word moderate, it doesn't mean that we're going to take a conservative and turn them into a liberal, but it forces them to find that sweet spot in the electorate where they can guarantee that they're going to win. It's going to force them to have a broad appeal rather than having a narrow appeal. It's one of the reasons Tea Party candidates don't do well, generally, is that the appeal is sometimes too narrow. And when they do win, they tend to win in open primary contests that are low turnout. You get a high turnout contest, Tea Party candidates don't win. They need low turnout and the ability to mobilize voters that aren't expected.
Fast, quick first segment. Keith Gaddie is our guest from the University of Oklahoma's Political Science Department. We'll have another segment coming up after this break.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett, Kent Myers, and our guest, Keith Gaddie.
Keith, let's focus now on the Republican U.S. Senate primary with Langford, primarily with Langford and Shannon. There were other candidates. Did Langford make up a lot of ground, or was he always ahead? The pollsters didn't seem to help us know much about that.
No, it's I'm getting the sense as you put all the information together, he was probably always ahead, or most always ahead. In fact, first round of the playoffs, I was at a Thunder game. I ran into Ed Goaz, who was Langford, doing polling work for Langford and consulting work for Langford, and we ran into each other in the stands, and he said, you know, this race isn't what it looks like. It's not what it looks like. And talking to folks throughout the campaign, Langford seemed to generally be polling ahead and Shannon was coming up. And in a way it was sort of a race to the finish, because you've seen these races before where you're always ahead, and then this guy's coming up from behind, and you want to make sure that you get to the finish line before they can overtake you. Okay. And you know, so I think that was sort of the mindset behind Langford's campaign, was stay ahead and not get overtaken. But you know, they ran 5 points ahead of their own track. Their track had them at 52% going into the last weekend of the primary. And they finished at 57. They won by something like 20 points. And it was just an amazing win. And the thing everybody forgets about James Langford, which was evident when he ran for Congress, is an amazing network, high name recognition throughout the state, generally positively regarded, raised a great deal of money, but also a very good voter targeting operation, and an operation that relied not just on phones, but also on the internet. I'm not sure if it was critical to his success. Some people have been very critical of the Shannon consultants in this campaign, I think somewhat unfairly. But it was evident that Langford was able to run a campaign that was very positive. I think Senator Coburn sort of wrapping himself around Langford at the end of the campaign in the wake of those negative ads certainly didn't hurt at all. In fact, when Tom Coburn comes into a primary where he puts his marker, that tends to be the winner. He's good at that. I mean, whenever Tom Coburn bets 0-0 in the casino, we ought to all follow him. So.
Well, I was wanting to get to that next, and that is the Coburn's impact on the final turnout. Pretty big?
Well, yeah, I think in terms of the final outcome, it did matter. I think it mattered to the margin at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It froze Langford in place as being the positive candidate, and it froze Langford in place as Coburn's logical successor. And you know, something that I was telling the media when they would call in here from around the country trying to understand this place. Oklahoma gets interesting about every 4 years to the national media in situations like this. Is that, when you listen to Tom Coburn's rhetoric, he'd sound like T.W. Shannon. You look at his voting record and you look at his explanations for why we do things, then he looks like James Langford. Tom Coburn's a deep thinker. He's got a lot of principle, a lot of philosophy behind his choices, but he's also practical. And James Langford has always been a guy who has done the reading and done the homework and understands policy. And actually, Mick and I, we were talking about this off camera earlier. When you see him interact with a crowd, you see that at work. This is not someone who comes off as being light. And I think that resonates with voters. And I think it carried through. And I think Coburn knew that always and probably was always poised to go here.
Let's talk about the state superintendent's race. Republicans have had their way statewide of late, but this one could shape up as an opportunity for the Democrats to win a seat.
Yeah, I mean, it was a divisive primary. All those ugly words that we were talking about in the third-party ads, or even in the candidate direct purchases, they all showed up in that campaign. Janet Barisi, I've said before, pretty much squandered her incumbency. She had a variety of very, very tough issues to deal with, but she also had a very adversarial posture in dealing with everybody, and went into this primary with very few friends, and it showed in the result. When you get in that position, the one thing you can do is strike back, and she struck back hard, and it pulled that campaign down, made it negative. I don't know if it damaged Joy Hoffmeister going into the general election, but the Democrats have a runoff. They don't have a nominee yet. And turnout's probably going to fall 50% going into that Democratic runoff. A lot of folks are not going to show up again. But the Democrats, this is their best issue in the state. It's the one issue Democrats have always owned, is Common Ed. And when you poll in this state of all the issues out there and all the issue positions among the two parties, the public likes Democratic positions on Common Ed more. You should spend more, you should pay teachers more, you should be putting a better quality product in the classroom, it should be getting to the students. They're not concerned with creation science, they're not concerned with ideology, they're concerned with the core curriculum. And I know that's, we didn't say Common Core, because that's the best way to kill something in the state besides Obama, is to call it Common Core.
It could be Common Obama Core.
Yeah, Obama
That
Core.
would do it.
Oh, that one rolls off the tongue too, doesn't it? Obama Core. But yeah, it's about both the core curriculum and then the enhanced curriculum, building the well-rounded person. This is a state when it was established that had art and music and theater in it, and people who could do math on the back of a scrap of wood to build something. There's no reason that our children can't do that too. So we have to give them schools worthy of their potential.
Let's switch to the governor's race. Any reason to think that Governor Fallin is in trouble?
No, not yet. I mean, Governor Fallin's positives are down from a couple of years ago, although her approval rating is still generally strong. Joe Dorman is, he's a good politician, he's a good guy. Not the kind of guy you'd see the Democrats put up in the past as a challenger. Joe's name recognition is not that strong, he's not that well known. I mean, we didn't have a contested Democratic primary in the state for the first time in decades, pretty much. I mean, there was no, Joe Dorman was it, but he doesn't have any one issue to latch on to convince the electorate to change horses yet.
Well, he's trying to use the safe rooms in schools and that issue. Is that just not enough?
Well, I mean, it's a good issue, and I think it's part of what makes Joe viable. I mean, it's enough that it keeps him in the mix. I think Joe Dorman can run in the low to mid 40s as things stand. He can run at that level of strength, but he's going to have to beat Mary Fallin pretty much outright. Yeah. And that is going to require some kind of epic policy failure, personal scandal, political scandal, the kind of thing that has never shown up in Mary Fallin's incumbency.
Yeah, she doesn't beat herself.
No,
and
no.
And she runs a hard campaign from start to finish, regardless of the lead she's got.
Well, I tell you, we got these two cowboys. They both learned how to do this stuff up in Stillwater, and I hate to admit it, but I mean these are good candidates. They're going to give it a good run. But Joe needs something bigger than safe rooms to get there, which means that he's got to do something like attach Mary Fallin to Janet Barisi. He has to attach Mary Fallin to her previous endorsement of Common Core, and somehow make Barack Obama and Obama Core more damaging to Mary Fallin than to Joe Dorman, who's the Democrat.
And he's got to find the money to penetrate that message, which could also be an issue.
I mean, it's going to take $3 million to win this. I think Joe can raise about 1.7 right now. Maybe if he gets traction, if the right issues break, the money could be there on the sidelines, but a lot of it's going to come from out of state. I think it's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, I think he has a tough time convincing people it's a winnable race. If he could do that, then perhaps some of the issues you bring up are pertinent. But it seems like that's a tough sell.
Yeah, the thing is, if it was an open seat, Joe Dorman would be interesting. But the thing with Joe Dorman that's going to be frustrating if he actually becomes competitive is there's nothing to rip down. Joe Dorman is a 42-year-old man who is not corrupt. He lives in a small house in Rush Springs. He drives an old pickup truck. He's always been in public service. I mean, this is not a guy who got rich in public service. You can't paint him with that tar brush. It's just there's not a whiff of scandal about the guy. So all you can do is go after his politics, and he's got an A+ rating from the NRA. I mean, it's just, he's probably the last old school Democrat left in the state.
We're out of time. Would love to get a sentence or two from you, though, on the 5th District race.
Well, toss-up. I mean, Patrice Douglas or Steve Russell will be the next congressperson, more than likely, but they tied and only split about half the vote in the first round. That means for the next 5 weeks, we pound away at this thing, and whoever can put the money together and remobilize the vote, that's the winner.
Right.
Yeah.
Keith Gaddie, our guest today on The Verdict. We're going to have you back. We got a lot more to talk about.
Much obliged, Mick.
All right.
Thanks, Keith.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we return.
The human body, an amazing machine. What we're capable of is astonishing. If we look to what makes us human, we find that life is more than a heartbeat, and hope is more than an idea. That knowledge moves us forward, and our community keeps us together. OU Medicine is at its heart, keeping Oklahoma alive and well.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
You have children coming from a different lifestyle, different mindset. You have to open your arms and really do what you have to do to have that child become a part of your family. And if it's more patience, that's what you do. Kids gotta know they can trust you. And that's what we try to do with these kids.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We are wrapping up a show with Keith Gaddie of the Oklahoma Political Science Department.
We're really glad to have Keith back on, and we appreciate him coming up here from Norman and giving us the time and his expert view on just what we did in the primaries here in Oklahoma.
I think most of our viewers probably learned something. Many learned a lot. You tend to view Oklahoma politics from an Oklahoma-based lens, and Keith adds a broader perspective. He's an interesting guest. We have a couple of websites I'd like to give you some heads up on. First of all, you can get more information from Keith and the Political Science Department at the University of Oklahoma if you go to ou.edu and then look for the Political Science link. And we have a website too. Would love you to go there and tell us about a guest you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of The Verdict. That's theverdict.tv, theverdict.tv. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.